Their interpretation of Islam is not the interpretation of the 21st century. It goes back perhaps 1400 years. For somebody like Khamenei to one day shake the hand of an American president is the end of the regime. We had Khomeini, who was a very dogmatic potential dictator who became a dictator because of the intense hatred that many people in Iran have for the regime. It may be that it will be impossible to stop them seeking revenge.
It feels like it's a form of blaming the victim to a certain extent, where we sort of say, well, the Iranian people brought this on themselves.
There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that Khamenei and his hardliners are going to face defeat, and collectively they are going down this road.
Well, hi there. Welcome to episode 380 of Roqe. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. Let's talk about 7 rules for modern dictatorship and how Ayatollah Ali Khamenei keeps acing the test. You know, they say dictators are mad, unhinged, delusional, but let's be honest. Dictators follow a playbook, and in the Islamic Republic of Iran, that playbook has kept one man, one brutal system in power for over 4 decades and counting. Ali Khamenei has outlasted presidents, uprisings, sanctions, scandals, and wars, not by luck, but by method. Here's how. Rule number 1, control the narrative. Don't just censor, define. In the Islamic Republic, state-run media doesn't report, it scripts. So protests become riots. Murdered women become moral offenders. Exiles become foreign agents. Repeat the lie until it becomes the truth. Rule number 2, crush dissent quickly and quietly. You don't negotiate with rebellion, you suffocate it. When Mahsa Amini's death sparked a movement, the regime didn't wait to ask questions. They fired, they raided, they buried teenagers before they had time to go viral. It's not about justice, it's about speed. Kill the flame before it spreads. Rule number 3, create an enemy to fear. A dictator always needs a monster outside the gates. For Khamenei, it is America, Israel, the West, the narrative. We're not the threat, they are. So when missiles fly or the sanctions hit, the regime wraps itself in the flag and says, see, they're coming for us. And just like that, repression becomes protection. Rule number 4, weaponize religion. Don't just lead, sanctify your rule. Khamenei isn't just a politician, he's the voice of God. Oppose him, and you're not just wrong, you're damned. It's not faith, it's a firewall. Number 5, pretend to listen. Every dictator needs a puppet show. So the regime holds elections. It introduces moderates. It lets you vote between 2 versions of the same dead end. Enter Pezeshkian, the so-called reformist. Smiling for the West, carefully curated, completely powerless. This isn't democracy. It's illusion management. Rule number 6, outlast the world's attention span. When the heat rises, pause, smile, shake hands, then wait. Khamenei knows how to outlast the headlines. One week it's Massa, the next week it's Gaza, then Trump tweets a deal is on the table, and suddenly the Islamic Republic is back in the game. The world forgets, but dictators don't. And finally, rule number 7, kill hope. The final move isn't violence, it's fatigue. After decades of trauma, executions, and betrayal, Iranians are told quietly, relentlessly, that nothing will ever change, that exile is the only escape, that hope is a punchline. It's not just about breaking bones, it's about breaking spirit. So here we are again, another crackdown, another deal, another moment when the dictator doesn't fall but tightens his grip, because this isn't chaos, this is choreography. Ali Khamenei is not just a relic. Maybe he's a masterclass in modern authoritarianism. And he is still getting away with it. Not because people don't resist, but because the system follows the rules. So maybe the question is no longer how does he stay in power? It's how many more times are we going to let him? This is Roqe, episode 380, How Dictators Stay in Power. It's July 10, 2025. This is Roqe. Well, hi there. Welcome to episode 380 of Roqe. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. Hello to you from Toronto. Salam dostan aziz, durud bar shama. Hope you are doing well wherever you are tuning in from around the world. You know, they say power corrupts, but perhaps more to the point, power seduces, and the lust to hold on to it corrupts everything else. How does a man stay in power for over 3 decades? Not by accident, not by public acclaim, and certainly not by delivering prosperity. No, the modern dictator stays in power through a mix of illusion, repression, manipulation, and strategic alliances. It is not charisma, and it's not chance, it's a playbook. And few have read from it as closely or as ruthlessly as Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. In recent weeks, that playbook has been cracked open once again. The Islamic Republic's supreme leader, long viewed by many as an aging ideologue on borrowed time, has been handed a new lease. Just when it looked like his grip might be weakening, at least 2 things happened. 1, a brutal and wide-ranging internal crackdown, the kind of force that reminds every Iranian dissenter that resistance comes with a price. And 2, a geopolitical twist that few could have predicted. The Trump camp, once vocal in its opposition to the Islamic Republic, now signaling openness to dealing with the regime again. A ceasefire, a softening, a realpolitik reset. Once again, it seems Khamenei is not just surviving, he's winning. Not in the eyes of the Iranian people, but in the game of power retention. Perception abroad matters more than approval at home. So the question before us is not just how dictators come to power, but how they stay there, how they reinvent their means of control, how they exploit enemies to justify internal force, how they dangle nationalism to stoke fear of the foreign, how they master the machinery of fear, hope, and narrative. And what does it say about the so-called free world that we, knowingly or not, sometimes play into their hands? Our guest today is no stranger to this discussion. Dr. Fathali Moghaddam is a distinguished professor of psychology at Georgetown University and a prolific author and a returning guest here on Roqe. His work has explored the psychology of dictatorship and mass obedience. So today we'll ask him, how do dictators stay in power in the modern age? And how has Khamenei managed to do it longer than most? What role does propaganda play? What role does international diplomacy play? And crucially, how do free societies and the diaspora resist enabling autocrats in their quest for eternal rule? Dr. Moghaddam coming up in just a few moments. Very much looking forward to having him back on the program. We are coming to you at roqemedia.com. That's the hub of all things Roqe. So if you want to see back episodes, feature interviews, funnies, videos, clips, guests, the bios of everybody who works on this show, all of that you can find at roqemedia.com. You can also find us on our platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Telegram. Obviously, you can watch us on YouTube. If you're not doing so already, switch over to our YouTube channel, and you can follow us on CastBox and Instagram, etc. as well. At Roqe Media is the handle. Let's get to our feature guest. Today's episode is brought to you with the support of FamLuxy. FamLuxy is a celebration of art, elegance, and individuality, an online boutique specializing in limited edition handcrafted accessories. Each piece is thoughtfully designed as a wearable work of art, reflecting a unique blend of creativity and personal expression. Beyond being a brand, FamLuxy serves as a platform for showcasing the talents of emerging artists. With a presence at prestigious events such as Fashion Art Toronto, Mona Niku Gallery in California, New York Fashion Week, and Miami Swim Week, FamLuxy continues to shine on international stages. It invites you into a world where craftsmanship meets style and every accessory tells a story. Check them out at famluxy.com. famluxy.com. All right, my featured guest today is an Iranian-British psychologist, author, and professor of psychology at Georgetown University, where he also directs the interdisciplinary program in cognitive science. Now, you may know Dr. Fathali Moghaddam from his compelling contributions to the Netflix series How to Become a Tyrant. You may also know him from his appearances here on Roqe. Born in Iran, he moved to England at the age of 8, returned to Tehran before the 79 revolution to do academic work, and was conducting research in Iran during the hostage crisis and the early years of the Iran-Iraq War. He later moved back to the West and has spent decades researching radicalization, intergroup conflict, and the psychology of dictatorship and democracy. Dr. Moghaddam has authored a number of landmark books on these subjects, including The Psychology of Dictatorship, Threat to Democracy, and Political Plasticity. His latest work, Collective Irrationality, explores how mass delusion and flawed group reasoning can help sustain authoritarian rule. This is a theme central to our conversation today. And right now, Dr. Fathali Moghaddam joins me from Washington, D.C. today. Hello, sir.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation. I'm always delighted to join your discussions. They're always lively and informative. Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for doing this again. Okay, Dr. Moghaddam, let's start with the headlines. Khamenei's regime was under immense pressure, internally from dissenters, externally from a war, and yet just as quickly it seems he's regained control. How do you interpret this moment in Iran? Has the regime just been handed a lifeline? And is this another unsurprising element of the dictator playbook?
It is a very important historical moment for Iranians and for Iran because all kinds of changes could be coming about. But at the same time, there is continuity in the way that the dictatorship in Iran persists in its rule and continues to suppress the population. So there is change and continuity. We have to look to see what other factors could come in. For example, what other wars could begin in that region.
What about the role of Donald Trump and the U.S. administration? On the one hand, at some point there was some signaling that there was a desire for a regime change, and then there was now signaling a potential willingness to deal with the Islamic Republic. How does that kind of international inconsistency empower dictators?
The regime in Iran has, from the beginning, been sustained by a slogan of death to America, death to Israel. And that is not going to change. Any kind of negotiation between the Islamic Republic and the United States will be headed by so-called moderates in Iran, but the hardliners will be sitting back knowing that they can put a stop to these negotiations very quickly if they need to, and also knowing that they're going to stick to their slogan of death to America, death to Israel. That is their basic foundation. That is their ideology, and that is their reason for existence. The hardliners in Iran are not going to get rid of the reason for their existence. Therefore, they will never stop saying death to America, death to Israel. They will not enter into a situation where they have to abandon that position. Because if they abandon that position, that is the end of them.
So how do we explain, you mentioned the so-called moderates, or the reformists as they're called. How do we explain Pezeshkian doing this interview earlier in the week with Tucker Carlson, where he says, we don't even mean death to America when we say that. We mean just death to instability of some kind. How does that jive with what you're talking about the sustaining of a dictatorship through slogans like "Death to America"?
The hardliners in Iran, that means Khamenei and Khomeini before him, and their followers, they have always used two fronts. The first front is their real front, that is the slogan "Death to America, Death to Israel," and their hardcore supporters. That is one front. In front of that, they position the moderates, the so-called moderates. They place people from the beginning. They put Ahmadinejad and even Bani Sadr before that, people who really they got rid of later on. I mean, Ahmadinejad is still alive, but he's not. He's a non-entity in that system now. They have always used people like Pezeshkian as another front, and they know that they can pull down these moderates or so-called moderates very quickly if they need to. So we have to keep in mind that instead of just thinking of backstage and front stage, the Islamic Republic actually has two front stages. One is the front stage of the real people in power, Khamenei and others who are the hardliners. And there's a second front stage that is run by the moderates who really don't have power and can be pulled down any time. And we have to remember always that the constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran gives all power to the Velayat Faqih. The Velayat Faqih can at any time change direction. He can at any time dictate to the president, to the Majlis, and everybody else. It doesn't matter if they're elected or not. He is the person who calls all the shots. So this is perfectly legal according to the Constitution of Iran.
Are those two faces that you're talking about, the so-called hardline and then the moderate, are they for external consumption for the rest of the world to think one thing or another, or are they also for internal consumption? And are they something that we've seen in other dictatorships, Stalin or North Korea?
An excellent question. I believe that those two faces, the moderate face at the front and the real face, the hardline face at the back, those are for both internal and external consumption. They are manipulated to change people's moods inside Iran, give people some hope, and then they are manipulated to change the image of the Republic of Iran outside. So they're for both, inside and outside. But of course, we have to remember that the real power lies with Khamenei, and it will lie with the next Velayat Faqih. He will have absolute control.
And again, is that that dynamic of the hardline and moderate something we've seen in other similar authoritarian societies, or is this somehow unique to Iran and weaponizing religion?
We have seen it to some extent in other dictatorships, not so much in the Soviet Union at the time of Stalin. Stalin didn't need to do this. He wasn't that concerned about the foreign image of the Soviet Union. But we have seen it in some other dictatorships. For example, we have seen it to some degree in some Eastern European countries before the collapse in 1990 of the communism. We see it to some degree even in North Korea. They're more concerned with world opinion than the Islamic Republic is. So we have seen it to some degree, and we certainly see it to some degree in China. It's not completely unique to the Islamic Republic, but the level of control that the hardliners exert in Iran and the manipulation they have is quite distinct and different. I believe the level of control is even higher than Putin has in Russia right now.
How does the regime in Iran, from your view, how has it become so expert at resetting the clock, if you will? I mean, we've seen the cycle we just saw in the last month or two play out over and over again, albeit in different ways. There's always, small nuances or differences. But I mean, the idea that there's some sort of event, protests rise, the world watches, then there's a brutal crackdown, the regime stays in power. How have they managed to so expertly kept that cycle going?
I think there's two elements here. One is the naivety of the foreign leaders dealing with Iran, starting from President Carter. I think he was an extraordinarily naive person when it came to foreign policy. And on it went with the naivety of other presidents. Now we've got to President Trump. And part of the naivety is the belief that they can negotiate and that Iran will actually negotiate with them in important ways. They don't seem to understand that this regime cannot maintain itself if it drops the anti-American standpoint. They don't understand that for somebody like Khamenei to one day shake the hand of an American president is the end of the regime.
And sorry, why would that be? You've said that a couple of times now. Why is the anti-Americanism so fundamental?
Well, I have elsewhere described two kinds of revolutions. One kind of revolution I've described as the shark revolution. Image of a shark. The other kind of revolution is more reclusive. It is an octopus, the image of an octopus. The octopus revolution involves a country that is fairly reclusive, that goes within itself, closes its borders, and tries to deal with the world by shutting itself off. That's one kind of revolution we see in history. The opposite of this is what I call the shark revolution. Sharks constantly need to keep moving, and they don't actually stay within a territory, whereas the octopus stays within a territory. The shark is constantly trying to break out to new territories, and Iran has a revolution that is a shark-type revolution. It is always trying to burst through borders. It is always trying to export. It is always trying to influence beyond its own borders. Iran's revolution is naturally outward looking and outward moving. If it stops trying to move out, it will die. That's its instinct. At the moment, it's had its hands chopped in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq to some degree, but it still has the Houthis. And you saw that just in the last few days, the Houthis have been very active again, spurred on by the mullahs once more.
But when you say outward moving, you're also saying outward moving that has to involve an element of anti-Israel, anti-America?
Absolutely. Outward moving in the sense that they're trying to export their values, they're trying to export their revolution. From the beginning, this was not an Iranian revolution. This was an Islamic revolution.
But just for the fun of it. Well, but just for the fun of it. I've never really considered this, but can there not be an Islamic revolution that isn't anti-American?
Not from this set of people. The interpretation of Islam that comes from Khamenei and his followers, and Khomeini before him, this is necessarily anti-American, anti-Western.
Right.
One of the things we have to keep in mind is that Islam has not had a reformation, not the Islam that they stick with. They have not had a reformation. Their interpretation of Islam is not the interpretation of the 21st century. It goes back perhaps 1400 years. So we have a very different interpretation. Now, they have been forced by circumstances to adopt a nationalistic pose in the last few months. They have sang a Iran, they have done all that, but this is just another front.
Mm.
This is not sincere.
Right.
They are not nationalists. These are Islamic fundamentalists who believe that all of Islam must rise up against the United States. It must squash all efforts to limit its power, and it must crush Israel and wipe out Israel.
But
This is
the nationalism is a very effective technique, even for a theocratic dictatorship, because this is exactly what was employed at the beginning of the Iran-Iraq War, right? I mean, some would argue it actually saved Khomeini and his regime by consolidating power around the idea that we're being attacked by Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and we all need to be on board here to save Iran.
Yes, exactly. I was in Iran at the beginning of the first 3 years of the Iran-Iraq War, and I actually went to the war front on several UN missions. There was big debate, deep debate, stressful debate among secular Iranians. What should they do? Should they sit on their hands, or should they go and defend Iran? Well, many of them gave their money, gave their resources, some of them gave their lives, and they defended Iran. But in the end, the secular defense of Iran was wiped out. Khomeini, in the end, signed the treaty that he did not want to sign. The peace came, and by that time, the end of the secular position was reached.
Right.
And as you know, a lot of people were either killed or imprisoned by the end of that, and they were wiped out, and as the fundamentalists came into power.
Dr. Moghaddam, in your work, you've introduced the concept of springboard to dictatorship. Can you tell us what that is, and how might that apply to the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Yes, the springboard to dictatorship begins with the idea that in any society, in any group, in any community, there are always potential dictators in terms of personality characteristics. When we think about our own families, our own friends, we can always identify people who, personality-wise, they are potential dictators. The question is, well, why don't they come to power? My answer is that they come to power when the springboard to dictatorship is available, when the context is fruitful for dictatorship. Go back to Germany in the 1920s and 30s. You see the characteristics of that springboard, where there is instability, there is fear of decline among Germans, there is fear of economic and moral decline, there is instability. They need a savior. And it's at that time, when you feel this decline, when you feel that your group is in danger, that you look for that person who's going to save you. And that is when the potential dictator steps forward. That is when Hitler steps forward, he gets support, and he transforms a democracy into a dictatorship. Now, in Iran, what we had briefly in 1979, when people like me went back, we had a brief moment where we could have moved from a dictatorial system that was not that harsh, actually, to a more open society, a more open society in the sense that it couldn't become a democracy immediately, but it would at least allow more freedoms. We had about 9 months of time, but we failed. Now, why did we fail? That is what I've discussed in relation to the term political plasticity. Political plasticity refers to how fast, how quickly, and how much we can change politically. Our thinking can change, our behavior can change. It turns out when you study revolutions that after a revolution, it is very difficult to get rapid change. What you look for is a leader who will help people move towards a more open society. It will take time. Unfortunately for us, we did not have somebody like Mandela. We did not have an open-minded person who would help us more towards democracy. We had Khomeini, who was a very dogmatic potential dictator who became a dictator. So we were wrong in our choice of leadership.
This isn't just a dictatorship, though. This is a theocracy, a religious-based dictatorship. How, in terms of those elements of the springboard to dictatorship, how does this regime manipulate religion as one of those springboards?
Potential or actual dictators always need a justifying ideology. Hitler had Nazism, Mussolini had fascism. The mullahs have religion, they have Islam, their interpretation of Islam, of course. Many people dispute that they interpret Islam correctly. Their interpretation of Islam is helping them to maintain a dictatorship. However, you'll notice, as you mentioned yourself, there are several times in the last few decades where they've had to abandon the emphasis on Islam and to move to nationalism. At the beginning of the Iran-Iraq war, in the last few weeks, they've had to do that again. Why? Because they've found that the number of Iranians who are moved by religion, by Islam, to sacrifice themselves, that number has dwindled quite dramatically. I would estimate that right now there are probably about 20% of the population who are dependent on the regime directly. And of those 20% of the population, probably something like 5% only are absolutely dedicated to the regime. The rest of them are willing to abandon the regime. So the regime has found that the number of people who will sacrifice for it, for sustaining the regime, has declined. You can see this in their recent attempts to show popular support. The marches never involved the millions that were involved in '79. The marches involve a couple of 100,000 at the most, and many of these people were bussed in.
But where did the people who, in terms of your concepts, your ideas, where do the people fit in? And I suspect this is actually a large cohort in current Islamic Republic of Iran in terms of the population. Where do the people fit in who don't necessarily support this regime, might even hate the way things are being led inside in Iran, but don't have the energy or don't want to take the risk or fear speaking out, or just sort of say, well, we have to deal with this status quo for now and try to do our best under it and win little reforms if we can? Where do they fit in?
I do believe that they are the majority right now. They're looking for some hope, some small changes. But as you mentioned, at the moment, they're not willing to sacrifice their lives and all their resources Why? Because they feel that they've been let down so many times. They're not sure of what the foreign powers are doing. They're not sure of the Trump regime. They feel that they could be abandoned very quickly. And what they hope is that better times are going to come almost by accident. Almost by accident.
But not to, and certainly not to blame folks for, not getting out in the streets with pitchforks, so to speak, or something. But do dictatorships depend on that kind of quiescence?
They certainly do. The dictatorships depend on they depend on this kind of apathy, but they also depend on luck. In many ways, it's a matter of luck, who is at hand. Now, Khamenei is coming to the end of his life. He's obviously been very worried that he would be killed. And it's not clear who the next dictator will be. Who is he going to name as the next Velayat Faqih? And of course, he's got a small group of people who are supposed to select the Velayat Faqih, but we know that it's going to be Khamenei who makes the choice, really. So that transition could actually work to the benefit of Iranian people if things work out differently from what Khamenei wants, because that's a very dangerous transition.
One of your newer concepts is something called collective irrationality. You've written a small book about it that's just come out. What does it mean? How does it explain the persistence of support for dictatorships, and how do we see collective irrationality in the context of Iranians?
Collective irrationality refers to the tendency for human beings to collectively, as a group, take the wrong turn, do the wrong thing, make the wrong decision, and continue along a path that is destructive. Collective irrationality is important because individuals can stand aside and rationally see that things are going wrong, but individuals do not have the power to stop the collective. Let me begin with our situation with global warming. Human-induced global warming is going to inflict huge pain on most of humanity. Scientists are pointing this out very clearly. It's going to happen in the next half a century. Yet collectively, we're going down this road. Let me give you an example from COVID times. You may remember, as I do, that we went to shops, we went to grocery stores and found entire shelves missing. Where are the toilet rolls, where are the Kleenexes?
Right.
And we talked to one another individually and said, oh, this is very silly. Why are people doing this, hoarding these things? And yet individually, we could be rational, but we went and collectively did exactly what we were saying was irrational.
I don't think that, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think that analogy works for the situation of Iran, though. I mean, because in the case of Iran, individuals or anybody has an issue with speaking out because they could get killed.
Yes.
There's no threat to your life if you speak out against climate change, right? So the part of collective irrationality that I'm actually privileged to get to ask you about directly that concerns me is it feels like it's a form of blaming the victim to a certain extent, where we sort of say, well, the Iranian people brought this on themselves, where it's like, well, maybe back in '79, but at this point, you're facing a facing, guns. I mean, you're facing a military. You're facing an iron-fisted regime. So how much can you blame this on irrationality?
You're absolutely right. We have to make a distinction between what happened in 79 and what is happening now. In my book, I discuss collective irrationality with respect to the lead up to the 79 revolution. I wouldn't apply it to what's going on right now, except that I believe that actually the hardliners are now experiencing collective irrationality because they have set themselves on a road that can only lead to defeat. There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that Khamenei and his hardliners are going to face defeat, and collectively they are going down this road.
Today's episode of Roqe is brought to you with the generous support of Farouk Catering. Farouk Qayadi is the chef and owner of Farouk Catering with several years of experience in the Greater Toronto area, and wow, her food is fantastic, from appetizers to hors d'oeuvres to Persian samplings to the signature chicken pate dish. Her catering tables have been truly amazing customers and clients, and you must give them a try. We have had Farouk Catering here at the Roqe Hub, and what she's doing is amongst the best you can find. Thank you to Farouk Catering. You can find the chef herself at Farouk_Qayadi on Instagram.
There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that Khamenei and his hardliners are going to face defeat, and collectively they are going down this road. Why? Because their world is shrinking and their resources are shrinking and their friends are evaporating. So I'm not applying collective irrationality to Iranian people. I'm applying it after the 79 revolution to the hardliners, actually.
Gotcha. Give us an example of the in 79 where we would have seen collective irrationality that would lead to a revolution that would lead to the co-opting of a revolution by the Islamists.
I think we all suffered the same problem in that we supported a leader, Khomeini, who we did not know. I was very surprised when I arrived in Iran in 79 that very, very few people, even religious people I had met, had actually read his book, Islamic Republic. Very few people had actually listened to his speeches about elections and women. So we were going down a road where we thought we knew what the outcome was, but we were in a dark tunnel. We really didn't know. Collectively, we were going down a road that we were blind to. And supporting Khomeini, very few people actually raised the issue and said, wait a minute, this man is not going to lead us to a more open society. He's not what we think he is. And you may remember that at that time, there were stories about how people looked up to the moon and saw Khomeini's image.
Yeah.
We had all these kinds of projections and fabrications that were shared collectively, and we went along with the movement.
Yeah.
So in some ways, you could argue that the hesitancy of Iranians right now to follow opposition is to some extent a backlash to that period where we made such disastrous mistakes.
Yeah, I hear you. when you talk about the face and the moon, I think of, that's also a trope in dictatorships, right? That the myths that are built around, I think it was Kim Jong Un, that they said, the day he was born, there were the flowers bloomed and the weather turned in Korea, etc. I mean, it's the kinds of things that are built around the hagiography of these figures, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you find this again and again with the different dictators, the stories that build up, the myths that build up. And this is collectively shared narratives about the dictator. And these kinds of narratives came up in 78, 79 with respect to Khomeini, his benign attitude towards women, his equality kind of mindset, all these myths that we conjured up. It was part of our collective irrationality supporting this movement and going down a road where we thought we knew what Islam is according to their interpretations.
Can collective irrationality be applied to people who believe who are staunch believers in terms of religion, or is that somehow offensive?
Well, that there are psychological theories that apply to the people who believe in religion, etc. For example, one of them is terror management theory. The idea is that human beings are unique in that they are very aware that they're going to die. And in order to deal with the terror of death, I mean, if I think about death every day,
Yep.
I'm going to be feeling terrorized. We conjure up, we construct narratives, worldviews such as religions, in order to help us protect ourselves from this fear of death, so that I might believe that when I die, actually, I'm carried by a great eagle to an island and live there forever in happiness. And you might believe that actually it's a tortoise that will carry you across the sea. But we all have our constructed worldviews, and these protect us. There are these kinds of psychological stories about why it is that people don't get along with others who are different from them, because obviously, if you believe in the great turtle and I believe in the great eagle, one of us is wrong, at least. And so when we meet and we discuss these things, we come to blows.
I'll go with the tortoise, by the way, of those two. I wish I could believe in that. When we talk about collective irrationality, can there be a generational element to this? I mean, just to lean on your psychological side, you're expert of psychology. How do we explain the young people of Iran, who were so instrumental, as you remember, in the last 3 or 4 years ago with the Mahsa Amini uprising, the Women Life Freedom uprising, who have been born into a ideological system, a theocratic sort of dictatorship, and who see it for what it is in terms of seeing the lies and who rebel against it? How do we explain them?
I think we explain them mainly by recognizing that human beings have critical capacity, and the young people growing up in Iran can see the corruption and the immorality of the regime. One of the things we have to keep in mind about dictatorships is that they inevitably become more and more corrupt. This is because the population cannot question authority. When you cannot question authority, the authority figures recognize that they are almost immortal, almost impervious to any criticism, and they become more and more corrupt because they can get away with it. And so, because of that corruption, the young people can see the rottenness of the system. They can see that it is all rotten. And what they can do is take two different positions. One is a public position where they have to endorse certain things in order to get on and get a job, etc. But privately, they're completely cynical, and all the evidence from surveys in Iran show that they have turned against religion.
Yeah. You've said something interesting that dovetails with this part of the conversation that I want to ask you about, which is that when we think about dictatorships, we think about dictators, we think about a person, usually a man, Khamenei, Stalin, Idi Amin, these type of figures. You've talked about dictatorships as a collective phenomenon. How are they a collective phenomenon?
Of course, traditionally we think of personalities. So we think of Nazi Germany as being represented by Hitler. We think of the Soviet Union represented by the Stalin type. However, we have to keep in mind that one person cannot make a dictatorship. A dictatorship requires collective participation, collective support in different ways. And in this sense, it is a collective movement, and collective irrationality comes into play. We have a tendency to focus on leadership and only on leadership. And that makes sense, but think about the American context. Can we explain the current situation in the United States only by referencing Donald Trump? No, it's a context that created Donald Trump,
Right.
gave him the opportunity to get to power, and then we had about 70 odd million people voting for him, and about 85 million people who didn't vote at all. So it's the context that allows that individual to come to power. Once that individual comes to power, that individual can create institutions and a framework to remain in power. And that's what's happened in Iran. The repressive system based on religious ideology that allows the hardliners to keep power. And of course, part of that is the relationship between those in power and the material resources. The Republican Guards now own much of the Iranian economy. That's part of the reason why they are supporting the mullahs still. They have interests in what's going on.
Is the idea of collective irrationality, let me just say irrationality. Can we look at the way the rest of the world interacts with the Islamic Republic of Iran regime as a form of collective irrationality as well, in terms of Western leaders knowing exactly at this point what this regime is capable of and what it has done, but still willing to take half measures or do deals or, somehow engage? Is that a form of collective irrationality on the West's part, or is that just moral irrationality?
It is to some degree collective irrationality in that they have remained collectively blind to what the hardliners in Iran actually are about. They have not realized what the hardliners are trying to do. Let me take the instance of Salman Rushdie. From the beginning, when the fatwa came from Khomeini, the West tried to deal with it by fudging the issue, by ignoring the issue. And they didn't realize that that will not get them very far because eventually Salman Rushdie was attacked. The poor man has been blinded, as far as I know, in one eye, severely damaged. And he had thought that he had overcome this, that after decades it had been forgotten, but it's not forgotten. At the same time, in the last few weeks, fatwas were given against Trump and Netanyahu. And again, the West has completely ignored these. And in the long term, these will come back to haunt the West. There's no doubt in my mind, because you have to understand the mindset of the fundamentalists who are giving these fatwas. And the West is collectively blind to what is happening and what is going to happen.
Dr. Moghaddam, one of the debates that we've been having on this show in the last 3 or 4 weeks is whether the recent events, the war, the response, the so-called ceasefire, all of that, whether it has not just created a lifeline but emboldened the regime at this point, and vis-a-vis Trump's signaling that he wants to do deals, etc., or whether the regime is now in an utterly weakened state. Khamenei in the bunker, and the generals who were killed, and the state of the economy, etc. In terms of your study of dictatorships and what we've seen around the world for generations, do you see signs that this dictatorship is, quote unquote, cracking at this point?
Typically, the perception of the dictators of themselves and their regime is divorced from objective reality. That is, both of what you said is true. The regime is both weakened and at the same time emboldened. The regime is weakened in that its proxies in Syria, in Lebanon, in parts of Iraq have been crushed. But it is emboldened in that it has survived attacks and now sees itself as more powerful. And it is crushing what it seems to be any resistance internal to Iran. So both of what you said, I believe, are true. We have a weakened regime, but an emboldened regime.
What role do you think Iranians in the diaspora play in disrupting collective irrationality?
Iranians in the diaspora could play a more important role, a more vital role in changing what is going on in Iran. But they need to become coordinated and to cooperate with one another. This doesn't necessarily mean that they need one leader. It simply needs cooperation. I think it would be a mistake to try to coalesce around one leader, because it would lead to disagreements and disunity. So you can have cooperation between groups of Iranians to try to improve the situation in Iran, and perhaps to lead Iran to a slow transition rather than an eruption. I'm not sure if that is possible because of the intense hatred that many people in Iran have for the regime. It may be that it will be impossible to stop them seeking revenge. But I believe a slow transition without violence and revenge would be better.
Are you surprised that Ali Khamenei has lasted as long as he has?
No, I'm not surprised, because the people around him, the institutions around him, are all invested in his survival. They all depend on him to continue. So it's not surprising that he has lasted so long. But the next phase is going to be much more dangerous because there is not unity around who should be the next Valier Fari. I think that phase is a very dangerous one. Of course, the hardliners will quickly attempt to establish authority of the next person, but I'm not sure that it'll be that easy.
Final question to you. When you talk about the cooperation of those in the diaspora or coordination, which is no small feat, as you know, in terms of coordinating the polarized nature of the Iranians in the diaspora. Something that whenever I cite you to my friends and people I talk to, which I do often because I so value your perspectives. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's a bit pessimistic. I know you've moderated this every time we speak. You then end off with something a little on a happy note or something. But because you often talk about the fact that you can't teach democracy overnight. And that it has to be, and that for a place like Iran, that has one way or another been living within some kind of authoritarian rule for many years, albeit drastically different before 1979 and after, etc., that to suddenly expect it to turn into a liberal democracy when the regime falls is perhaps naive at best. Where are you at on that conversation?
I believe that regime change will come in Iran, but that after regime change, we have to lower our expectations about moving to a democracy very quickly. I would suggest it's much more practical to lower our expectations, both for people outside Iran and those inside Iran. For people outside Iran, for the groups, I would say, when you're trying to come together and coordinate, lower your expectations. Do not try to agree on one leader. Just try to cooperate on particular projects. And within Iran, I would say, limit our expectations in the sense that we attempt to bring more parity between men and women. We try to open up and give opportunities to different people, different groups, and limit our expectations, particularly materially. Don't promise people heaven. Just promise them better liberty, more justice, less corruption, basic things. In studying dictatorships from a psychological perspective and their transitions, what I have come to see is that transitions are very slow. You can see this in places like Russia. Yes, in 1990 we had the Soviet Union collapse. Yes, in 1917 we had the Tsar's regime collapse. But there's continuity right across, from the Tsar to Lenin, Stalin, on and on and on to Putin. The continuity is dictatorial rule by one man. Similarly, in Iran, we have to lower expectations. We have to coordinate around ideas such as justice, lowering corruption, giving equal rights to women, those basic fundamental issues to allow us to move the population forward rather than promising the earth and coming up with much less.
Dr. Fathali Moghaddam, it's always a great pleasure. I thank you so much for doing this again.
My pleasure, and I found it very stimulating. I try to be more optimistic and positive, but at the same time, as a psychologist, I have to look at reality and realistic change. And I believe we will move forward, but slowly. Thank you very much.
Hope to see you soon. Thanks for this.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thanks again to Dr. Fathali Moghaddam for joining us today. Always one of our favorite guests. Always an interesting, productive, provocative, educational conversation. Love having you on. Thank you, Dr. Moghaddam. Hope to see you again soon. And do check out his latest book, Collective Irrationalities, among all of his great works. If you have any comments on what he's had to say on this conversation or in general, you can always reach us at info@roqemedia.com, info@roqemedia.com, or post on any of our platforms. This is full time for Roqe for today. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together each week. Savvy Roham Meher, Super Parisa Sanjarani, Tina the photo and video queen, and talented Anahita. Special thanks to Charming Kimia, the CK, Smart Pega, Methodical Comment, and thanks to the TRK, the Rising Keon, for your help. Thank you to all of you out there for supporting us and sharing our content. Please do subscribe if you haven't done so already on any or all of our platforms. You can usually find them at Roqe Media. Roqe Media on Apple or Spotify or Telegram or SoundCloud or CastBox. You can find us on Instagram at Roqe Media. You can find me on Instagram at Jian Ghomeshi. And as I like to tell you each week at the end of this show, and it's really important to heed this advice, Mizun Bashi.